Properties and Streets Committee meeting for the Village of Sister Bay on Tuesday, August 30th, 2022. Roll call, Zashki here.
Dorshing here.
Berto here.
And we have Kadanko absent. I will motion that we approve the agenda as published.
I'd like to add something. Oh, never mind. Yep, I'll make a second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Do we have any comments or concerns from the public with us this morning on a non-agenda item? Hearing none, I'll ask staff to summarize correspondence received pertaining to the two buildings on the agenda this morning. And if it would be easiest, Janelle, I would be fine with summarizing who sent in emails and what their general position or opinion was. So you don't have to read them all.
Okay, 1 minute, please.
Rob, just a note that if the correspondence came in after the deadline, if we're not able to summarize it right now, then they'll just be held over and presented at the next meeting and then to the board.
Yep, excellent.
Okay, so there was an email from LB Rowings that was sent to Rob. There was an email from Gail McCullum Prine that was sent to Rob. There was an email from Bill Ensing. There was an email from Bill Wilkeson. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that. Do you want me to summarize any of those emails or just?
I believe to my recollection, all those emails were expressing the opinion that the village hall should be maintained as a historic site.
Yeah, they were.
Okay.
Then there was an email from Carolyn Alt and an email from Mason Ross. There was an email from June Rosner. There was an email from Bruce Bell. There was an email from, let's see once, I believe it's Carl Madsen. There was an email from John Blossom. There was another email from John Blossom. I'm just
And
checking.
we have John with us this morning.
Pardon?
We have John with us this morning, I see, so we'll certainly give John a chance to further enunciate or clarify anything you would like to clarify in public forum. So that sounds to me accurate, Janelle, that we had a total of 9 emails.
I don't see any others.
Yeah, and that they were all in support of, or taking the opinion of supporting maintaining the village hall as a
Yes, they
historic
were.
site. Okay, thank you. Before we move on to the agenda, I just want to clarify a couple things. The meeting today and the evening meeting on September 6th in person at the fire station to discuss these two buildings are the result of substantive community feedback that began in earnest after a recent plan commission meeting. With this in mind, I want to take the opportunity this morning to remind concerned citizens that there is an opening on the plan commission. And if you are interested in serving, please contact our village administrator, Julie, via the village office. We would be very interested in hearing from you. Also, for anyone from the public who will be speaking this morning, we ask when you identify yourself by name before you speak that you also clarify whether you are a voting resident of Sister Bay or a visitor to Sister Bay. And I would just also like to remind you once again that for anyone from the public speaking today, please keep in mind that this meeting is for your input and for your commentary, and that committee members will not be engaging in decisions on the two buildings that are on the agenda today. With all that in mind, I will move to agenda item 5A, a public input session regarding the future of the Parks Maintenance Building. Would anyone from the public like to provide any input or commentary on the future of the Parks Maintenance Building? Nancy?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Nancy Akerley, I'm a Sister Bay resident, a voting resident. I recently read a comment by a former village administrator that said our village hall was so little used, generated so little income, and was in such disrepair that it needed to come down. Now, obviously, this board right now is not held to any former village administrator's opinion, but I wanted to do a little research on that. And parts of it I agree with, and parts of it puzzle me because I don't think a village hall is supposed to generate income. It's a community service provided to the community, much like the fire station, much like the library. And that it was in such disrepair that it needed to come down. I guess I'd like to address that first. When I went back and looked at the minutes of the planning committee, I saw a comment from a board member saying that that for many, many years, there had been money budgeted to maintain and upgrade the village hall, but that over the years, none of it had been used. I'm really curious about then what was that money used for, and why was the village hall not kept in repair? That's pretty concerning. Also, in terms of the building being little used, I agree that it is being used less now than it was, but I thought about that and came up with two conclusions, two reasons why it's being used much less. I'm part of the aging population in Sister Bay. The majority of the people in Sister Bay are in that category, and we just plain can't get in the building easily. The steps are not all that safe. There's no ramp, and the elevator hasn't worked for at least 12 years that I'm aware of, and probably longer than that. It's maybe works sporadically, but I remember when we had the centennial celebration in Sister Bay, we had an octogenarian who was going to speak and be honored at that, and the elevator got stuck and she had to be hauled out by her arms. It was not only an embarrassment, it was a real concern about the physical safety of anyone using that elevator. In terms of the building being historic, I heard the opinion that it was not an historic building from the Planning Commission meeting. It doesn't mean that George Washington slept there, but I believe it is historic. Much of the village was destroyed in 1912, certainly the central part of the village. And many of the buildings that were important to our history have been destroyed. The post office and the village hall are two of the remaining buildings that have been in existence since 1941, well, 1947 for the post office building. And it's been the center, the heart, a gathering place for the people in our village. I've heard other proposals for that land use being made, and I'm a little puzzled. Here we have a building that if we repair it, upgrade it, and bring it back to a usable condition, can be used 12 months a year by the residents of the village. And for other than 2 or 3 months a year, parking is not a consideration or a problem.
Nancy, I'm just going to
Yes.
ask you to pause for a minute because you're speaking to agenda item 5B, which we had not opened up for commentary yet. Agenda item 5A was anyone with public input regarding the future of the Parks Maintenance Building. Do you have any commentary on the Parks Maintenance Building? And if not, could you
Oh my
just
gosh, you mean,
could you-
I
could you
thought
pause?
we were
Could you
talking
just
about
pause?
the.
Could you just pause for a minute
course.
and let
Of
us see if anyone else
She's on the wrong
on
agenda.
the call today has any comments on the agenda item at hand, which is the future of the Parks Maintenance Building?
Oh, I apologize, Rob.
Then we'll get back to you, okay?
Okay.
Regarding the Parks Maintenance Building downtown near the library, any public commentary? Dick Burris, please go ahead, and you're muted, Dick.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, specific to the Parks building downtown. I felt it was important that I spoke to this because I have been vocal in the past about maintaining that building downtown. And I am currently not feeling that way. And there's a couple reasons. I was involved in the study committee to look at the 55 acres purchased by the village. And we did some measurements, some determinations of how far the parks maintenance building is out on that site by the dog park. And we evaluated the number of vehicles. A couple of us evaluated the amount of time that it took to get from that site. Years ago, when the proposal was taking that building down and moving everything to that area by the dog park, I think the village at that time, the maintenance department had 2 trucks or, in speaking with the head of the maintenance department at the time, the amount of travel time and just wasn't a good idea. Since that time, the village has expanded its fleet. Most of the trucks have a lot of the materials on them that they need for a particular job or jobs throughout the day. And as it sits, that building next to the library is very valuable real estate. You don't have to travel down Mill Road to see the amount of traffic generated during the course of the day. And whatever use is determined on that particular piece of property, I think it is no longer as useful as it used to be to a maintenance facility. So I would support the village moving its maintenance facility and maintenance operation out to the property, the 55 acres or the property adjacent to the dog park. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dick. Anyone else with us this morning with any input or commentary on the Parks and Maintenance Building? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to agenda item 5B, a public input session regarding the future of the Village Hall. I asked everyone to keep in mind that is one building, the Village Hall, that we're just having public input on this morning on this agenda item that remains. And Nancy, if there was anything you did not convey, I will let you jump back in and finish your commentary on the Village Hall.
Believe it or not, Rob, I actually do have more to say. The one charge that I was concerned about too was that the Village Hall was no longer being used. And I think to some extent that is true. Entering the building is more difficult. A lot of things are not being planned because we simply don't have access to the building. But what I'm very concerned about right now is that it seems to be targeted for obsolescence. The village has not kept up repairs. The village has not used their budgeted monies. But also in this past year, my grandsons are part of the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts who had stored their flags there and some of their materials there for their weekly meetings are no longer able to do that because Sister Bay has decided to charge them $40 a week for every single meeting, and they simply don't have the funds, so they cannot continue meeting there. That has contributed to the use, or the lack of use. Also, in addition to not being accessible, my husband called earlier this summer and tried to hire the Village Hall for something he's done many times over the last 15 years for a community function concerning music. And in the past, it was $100. He was told this year it is $500 to rent the Village Hall for one evening, in addition to the $500 that you put down as a security deposit. And we couldn't afford that, so of course we didn't do it. It seems as though raising those kinds of costs also makes it very difficult to use the Village Hall. I look at what Egg Harbor has done with their community meeting room, and Egg Harbor residents can use that and schedule that at no charge, which certainly makes a lot of sense because the Village Hall should not be a money-making thing. I would love to see cost comparisons between what it would cost to raise our Village Hall and replace it with a bathhouse for the beach versus the cost of renovating the hall. But the bottom line for me is that I think whatever it costs to renovate the Village Hall makes complete sense. to keep a building in place that is available for local residents 12 months a year, as opposed to a building with washrooms, which we already have within walking distance of the beach, a bathhouse, which we already have in terms of showers for the marina residents, in use 2 months a year. It just doesn't make any practical sense to me. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak, albeit at the wrong time.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Anyone else would, if you'd like to make any public input, please raise your hand. John Blossom, please go next.
All right, thank you, Rob. I'll just sort of, I second all the things that Nancy said, so with her very articulate presentation. I am a Sister Bay taxpayer. I'm not eligible as a voter. My grandchildren are 6th generation Blossom families that have been in Sister Bay for 6 generations now, but I am a non-voter. I am very strongly in favor of looking very carefully at maintaining this building, this historic building. There's been some question as to whether it really is a historic building or not. And Buzz did some great research and pulled out of the Door County Advocate files an article that was written Friday, August 8 of 1941. And I want to just read one short paragraph from it to you. This paragraph says, "The building, one of the finest in the state for any village of this size, was made possible by the public spiritedness of the residents of the community and the wholehearted cooperation of the National Youth Administration that furnished all of the labor on the building, with the exception of skilled craftsmen." Of course, then all the skilled craftsmen, many of the names you'd recognize very, very quickly, who supervised that part of the work. But my hope is that I don't know absolutely that the building should be or must be saved or can be saved. But I think that I'm very hopeful that the commission and the board will look very carefully at those alternatives, particularly calling in some of the very competent local contracting folks, the new owners of Carlson Erickson, for example, the prior owner of Carlson Erickson, and getting some real hard evidence. I talked to Paul Hass the other day. Paul was talking about how he had played basketball in that building, and he knew that the beams that support the floor were bigger than anything he'd ever seen in any building around. So there's some of that kind of input I think would be really helpful to get some input from some contractors, architects, people who really know what it might mean to restore and re-energize this building. So I thank you for the opportunity to comment. I sure hope that we can save the building.
Thank you, John. Anyone else would like to speak, please raise your hand. Dick Burris, you had your hand up first. Please proceed.
Well, Dick Burris, I am a resident of Sister Bay and a voter, and I spoke to the last issue, and in the last issue, I spoke to a change of heart because there had been an evaluation on my own part and on by other village individuals, and a determination had been made what would be the best use of a piece of property. In this particular case, there's been some discussion. I've read some of the comments. I completely agree with Louise that the building is underutilized. I completely agree that there's a lack of parking. I completely agree that there's a design problem. So there's a lot of things wrong with it, but it seems at this point in time, we're looking to find enough wrong with it to take it down. And I think we really need to turn that around and start to look at why should we keep it. There's been a lot of comments made by Nancy Akerley that I support in its entirety. I think the building is absolutely underutilized, and it's underutilized almost intentionally. We had a call from a Girl Scout leader who said that they stopped doing Girl Scouts there because it is so difficult to get the key back, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that electronic locks can be used to lock up a building or to open a building and reprogram the next day. So there's a whole bunch of things that we could do in order to make the facility a lot more and more easily used. I went down myself and I took the rise and run formula that we would need to put a ramp in. I don't know that the elevator was ever a real good design. And I know that the village has done some work. I've talked to Denise in the past, and we've looked at possibly taking the stage out, opening the back to a walkway or a deck in the back, much as the people in Sheboygan have done in one of their facilities. I think the building could be, in very short order, used and enhanced to be a great part of our village again. There's a lot of nostalgia talked about with that village hall, and people tend to minimize that, and I think that's wrong. You know, we have been force-fed a lot of what has gone on in this village in the last 10 years to a lot of people's displeasure. You know, we were promised nothing on the bluff, and well, we won't go there. That's not what this is about. But the fact of the matter is, people are tied to that village hall in a great way, not just residents, but visitors to this area. And I think it would be a huge mistake without a plan. Right now, it's kind of like, if we take this down, what are we going to do? If the village came to us and said, we really need this for, and the only thing they've really talked about is maybe a boathouse that some people would like and some people may not care about at all. That might be a good idea. I don't know. But I do think that the use that people enjoy in the village hall, or use of the hall, is a great enhancement to this village. And I think it would be awful to lose it without a very well thought plan as to why we need to get rid of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dick. Patrice Champeau, you had your hand up next.
Yes, I'm Patrice Champeau, and I am a resident of Sister Bay and a voting resident of Sister Bay, and a fifth generation raiser who we founded this village. I just want to convey that I think it would be worth every penny that the village could invest in saving the hall, because it is a historic building. If it was remodeled correctly and renovated, I think it could be even a drawing card to Sister Bay, and it's really the gem of the village. The construction, the beautiful stonework, you just do not get that anywhere anymore. We have so much, like Dick said, we have so many memories and historical things that have gone on there. You know, the Billy Weiss Post, built in 1941, all of the Lions Club plays. It's just such a center of the village, of who we are. And I'm frustrated that Sister Bay has become unrecognizable to me as someone who grew up here. We have wiped out so much. All that's left is the village hall, the post office, the Razor home, which probably won't stay much longer, Roots maybe, but when other communities are investing so much into saving their history, like Fish Creek and Ephraim and on and on and on, they're preserving their community and their history to draw tourism, to cherish their village, what they are all about. And the face of Sister Bay has changed so much that we have lost that. And if we just could hang on to a little bit of history that's left, I think it would be beneficial to the village, its residents, its visitors. It could be something really wonderful. And my other question is, if the hall was taken down, where is the new hall going to be? Is there going to be one? Where is it going to be? Is it going to serve the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts that we always used? Is it going to be available for weddings or gatherings or art fairs? All I hear is that they're going to replace it with bathrooms, a visitor center, which we already have. So it's really irreplaceable. And no other community, I don't believe, would even think of tearing down such a beautiful building. And it could be really great for the village. So please do everything you can to save it and keep it our village treasure and a historical site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrice. Dave Watkins, you're on mute.
Hello, my name is. Can you turn off your?
Yeah.
Sorry, one moment. All right. Hello, sorry about that. My name is David Watkins. I am a full-time Sister Bay resident and voter. I would like to voice my support for keeping the Village Hall. It is one of the last remaining iconic pieces of architecture in the heart of the village, and to lose that would just be really sad. For sure, it is underused, but you know, two reasons come to mind why it's underused. COVID is a big reason. And second, just if it wasn't, you know, maintained, it's not maintained. It's blazing hot in the summer and it's freezing cold in the winter. If it were modernized and kept up, you could use that thing year round. And I think it should be. It would just be a real shame to lose such a beautiful building right in the middle of Sister Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Buzz, you're on mute.
I'm unmuted now.
Right.
My name is Carl Madsen, normally known as Buzz. I am a voter in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a property owner in Liberty Grove, and I'm a second generation property owner in Liberty Grove. I'm just briefly going to comment that John Blossom mentioned some historic research I have done, and I will provide the planning committee with that research. I was just somewhat taken aback by the assertions that there was nothing historic about the building. That's untrue. Basically, it was dedicated just before the beginning of World War II in August of 1941. And going back through the advocate papers, archives through late 1941 and early 1942, you get a sense of just how important it was to this community 80 years ago to have this building. What went into
No, I got on my phone.
I'm sorry, somebody's not muted.
I didn't want to zoom in because I didn't want to be on there.
Okay, that anyway, I will send you that document, and Janelle, if you will distribute it to the committee members, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Buzz. Any other members of the public? Aretha, you're on mute.
Are you turned off?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. My husband David and I are in the same room. Hi, my name's Aretha Sills. I am a voting resident of Sister Bay. And I have such great affection for this building, I have to say, to start off. I feel like a lot of people who grew up in Door County, you know, we have a history there that is part of what makes it a historic building. I have a picture of myself at 4 years old. My dad, Paul Sills, is directing. He's rehearsing the Tales of the Arabian Nights with actors who were going to do it in Chicago. Later, they came here for the winter. The next year, I have a picture of myself. I was 5. I was like a runner-up in a Halloween costume contest. I was so proud. When I think about the library that was there, it was so important to so many of us. And I really feel that the building, beyond that, and I know that probably everyone on here shares that affection for the building, but I think beyond that, it really is a historic building. It's part of the local design language. That beautiful stonework is absolutely irreplaceable. I spoke to Ian Gort at the Wisconsin National Registry about it, and he agrees it's a historic building. The relation in the heart of the village to other buildings, the way it speaks to the post office, you know, the way the architecture of those buildings is talking to each other, and Al Johnson's across the street. It's like it's the character and the heritage of Sister Bay is really evident in those three buildings. And I think if any one of them, but especially the public ones, if those were lost, they would, we'd really feel it. And our visitors would feel it. You know, there's generations of people who have affection, like I do in my own personal way, for those buildings and just their placement. I think I was really excited to rent the town.
Aretha, I just want to stop you for a minute and ask you to please confine your comments to the Village Hall building this morning.
Yeah, I was gonna
Okay,
say
thank you.
that I was really excited when I moved into the village to rent the town hall, but I found it wasn't usable for my purposes. So partially because it hadn't been maintained, there was no air conditioning. The spray foam on the ceiling felt uncomfortable for the purposes as I would use it. There's no air exchange because there's no HVAC, which is important in the time of COVID, you know, that we would need some better air filtration. So I went to Fish Creek. They have really maintained the old town hall there very well. And I asked them how they had done that. And the Fish Creek, the old Fish Creek town hall, they call it, on Clark Park. There, so it's a really well-maintained building, and it's an example of something we could do. And I'd be happy to help out. And that's, I guess my main question would be, you know, that, I mean, I'm concerned about the cost of taking it down, as, you know, that needs to be factored in. That's no small expense. But I would just lastly just like to say, I think it's we are the changes, to echo other folks, the changes in Sister Bay have been so dizzying that to lose the character and the history and the continuity that important building brings to Sister Bay would just it's something we could never get back. Thanks.
Thank you, Aretha.
Okay.
Anyone else from the public who would like to provide input on the future of the Village Hall? Steve, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Steve Etor. I live at 2305 Orchard Lane. I echo the thoughts of the people who have spoken already. I think the Village Hall is an iconic building. Trying to replace that building would cost millions if it could even be done. Yes, it's fallen into neglect. It's fallen into neglect because the village hasn't maintained it and hasn't uses for it. I think it should be refurbished and utilized. It is indeed an iconic structure for Sister Bay. When you see that building, you think of Sister Bay. The thought of tearing it down, to me, is unbelievable. Both that building and the post office ought to be maintained and retained. I question, what is the purpose of knocking that building down? What is the overriding purpose? Is it need or is it greed? I just think that the community would be better served by maintaining and retaining that building and refurbishing it and using it for whatever useful purpose that it can serve. Thank you very much.
Rob,
Thank you,
Steve
Steve.
didn't say whether or not he was a voter in Sister Bay.
Yes, Steve, would you clarify that for us, please? You're on mute. If you could unmute yourself, Steve. Are you a voting resident of Sister Bay?
I am not a voter in Sister Bay. I'm a voter in Liberty Grove.
Okay, thank you. Any other public commentary this morning? Anyone with any input? Fred, you're on mute too. Please go ahead.
I just had to say, I agree with what everybody said. I think the building needs to be saved. It is a historic building. There's no other building in town like it except for the post office. It is the iconic building for Sister Bay. Everything else really is gone. So many buildings have been torn down. It just needs to be saved. It needs to be kept up and maintained. and made usable, if it isn't usable now. I don't think it needs to have a view of the water. That's not its purpose. Its purpose was for a gathering area. All you have to do is walk outside to see the water. And, why tear it down? Everything else along the shorefront has been torn down now. Half the shorefront in downtown Sister Bay is empty waterfront. It's all been taken off the tax rolls. With all the money that's been spent buying that property, it certainly can't be said that you can't spend the money to fix up the town hall. I mean, the village hall. It needs to be saved. There's no excuse to not save it. Oh, and I am a Sister Bay resident and a voter.
Thank you, Fred. Cheryl?
I wasn't going to speak.
Would you
I
identify
am
yourself, please?
non-
Would you identify
I
yourself,
am
please,
a
and let us?
resident of Liberty Grove. I am not a voting member of Sister Bay, but I just completed a large research project. My great-grandfather, John Beekner, was part of constructing at least 20 buildings. He was a stonemason in Door County. And if you look at every single community, there is a iconic stone building. And the thought of Sister Bay just getting rid of these two stone buildings, it just would destroy the continuity of the entire county. So I'm just aghast that that this is being considered. And I would agree with all the other comments that there is no reason why this building couldn't be updated, upgraded, and repurposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And for clarification's sake, we're discussing the village hall, not
Yes.
any other two buildings or other buildings that anyone would mention. Please, let's refine our commentary to the village hall building. Thank you. And I thought I saw a hand up. Anyone else from the public? Would you like to make any input this morning? Any commentary?
Rob, the one that says Terry and Dan's iPhone, they've been trying, I think, a couple times to speak.
Okay, that's where we've been hearing the interference, I believe. Terry and Dan's iPhone, would you please identify yourself and let us know if you're a voting resident of Sister Bay, and then we welcome your commentary.
Maybe not.
Okay. One last round of opportunity. If anyone from the public wishes to provide any input this morning. Hearing none, I'll ask my fellow Plan Commission members if there's anything they would like to add or say at this point. Denise, and then Sharon.
Couple of things. One is to answer a question of Patrice's, and there is discussion on building a new administration building and a new parks maintenance building out on the property that the village bought next to the sports complex and water treatment plant. We are in the process of deciding what should all be included in those buildings out there, where they should be placed, and a new, whether you want to call it a village hall, a community room, a community center, etc., is being discussed and most likely would be built out there. There's a couple things Julie had outlined in our very small packet of 4 pages. In there, I don't know if everyone who is participating outside of the committee members read that, and I guess I'd like her to kind of address where we have been when we first started talking about this, run through that. I'd also like her to talk about the zoning issues that we would have pertaining to the village hall in its location. And I would like to dispute, many people said that the village hall has not been maintained. It has been maintained. We have not done additional things to it. We did not put in, for a variety of different reasons throughout the years at budget time, the village board has decided to not expend money to put in the HVAC, but we have spent a lot of money getting rid of the black mold, dealing with the water issues, painting of the bathrooms. We just put in new toilets in some of the bathrooms there to the tune of $3,000. So have we upgraded it? No. Have we maintained it? Yes. So I wanted to clarify that. So if Julie could just run through the zoning issues and.
I'd like to just jump in there for a minute, Denise. I think it would be best at this point if we let Sharon as a committee member offer anything she would like to add. And then once committee members have spoken, we let Julie go over all of that stuff.
Okay,
Is that acceptable?
that is.
Okay, Sharon, please proceed with your comments.
Yes, I would just like to go on record. Here. Totally opposed to taking down the village hall, but I, of course, am one vote. I have been on the since 1994, and next to the loss of the two-room schoolhouse, that was the Sister Bay Schoolhouse that was 100 years old. This is the second worst idea. And I want to clarify a definition of historical, because that has rung throughout the comments. I want you all to know I appreciate all your comments, taking them all to heart, but I have already determined that I would vote against taking it down. I want you to know that. Historic isn't just about the age of a building. The term historic really has a lot to do with a meaningful, significant connection to the past that something holds value for. So that is an extension of the word, besides the fact that it's 80, some years old. I like the terms that I heard throughout the comments of regenerate, restore, preserve. Those are very significant terms. And I also would like to challenge the Historical Society as a group to work hard to preserve this, because that really is your commission, not just to have a nice museum at the edge of town that is a replica of the town. It is not the town itself, but that to preserve these buildings, anyone who's involved in the Historical Society, I challenge them to do this. I do see many uses for it. I also would like to question in a further meeting another time, our fee structure that would have, I was part of that would have disallowed or disadvantaged people like the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. I really want to question, have us take a look at that, because I was not of the opinion that for nonprofits and youth groups that would have been that difficult to charge, because that truly contributes to its use. So that is all I want to say, that I want to be on record that I'm against it.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. I would just like to add the following for everyone who's joined us this morning, and in particular, in reference to virtually everyone, certainly most everyone's commentary this morning that had to do with remodeling the village hall, keeping the village hall, that there couldn't be any reason for not doing so. And in regard to my comment, Denise mentioned over time in past years, money has been spent on black mold removal. What we have been told and in layman's eyesight believe is that we very well may still have a black mold problem there at the village hall. And my point to everyone today whose commentary revolves around the issue of remodeling or refurbishing the hall in a manner to save it and then utilize it more effectively is, especially considering that when we talk about monies to be spent, as has been mentioned in prior commentary, or not spent by decisions at the village board level. At the next village board meeting, September 20th, I want everyone to know that we will have an agenda item to discuss whether or not the village board in majority agrees that we proceed with approving the cost to do a certified mold analysis of the building, so that as we move forward with decision-making, we know clear cut in today's time what is the extent or lack thereof of a black mold problem, of a health concern, etc. And how would that impact, not just from a cost standpoint, but from a potential health and safety standpoint, any remodeling or refurbishing of the village hall that would be considered. The other thing that the board will be discussing in that agenda item is on the topic of ongoing and further discussions about potential remodeling of the village hall. Do we need to also devote the money and make the commitment now to an asbestos analysis, a certified asbestos analysis, so that we would know, were we to do remodeling, were we to consider doing something like retaining the building and putting in central air conditioning, etc., whatever that remodeling might be, is that complicated and or a health and safety issue based on what may be, an asbestos exposure situation that may be encountered or would be encountered during any kind of remodeling. I believe we owe it to the public at large and all of our concerned citizens to know that and to have, a certified analysis of those issues, so that as this decision process evolves and comes to conclusion at some point in the future, that it's not based on a layman's perception of what we think we see or may be there. Sharon?
Can I comment on the first agenda item, just an opinion on that one, since that was open to the public first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, just very briefly, I think the time has come to take down that building next to the library. It was only supposed to be there temporarily, wherever the best place is for it, the new, complex on the Wilson property or out near the sports complex by the dog park. I think the time has come certainly to take down that building. Whatever the use of that land will be for the village would be better served, I think, even if it's simply additional parking in the meantime for the town and for the library itself, which is very busy. That's my opinion on that building.
Okay. All right, I'll turn it over to Julie, our village administrator.
Sure. So just a little history as to why we're looking at these buildings at the current time. The village has village has begun the process of updating some of their plans and continuing some of their planning work on the Wiltsey property. Specifically, we need to update our outdoor recreation plan. It's outdated and we need to update it so we're eligible for grants for things such as trails or other recreational amenities. The village hall and the maintenance building have both been referenced in that plan, so we do need to look at it as part of that update process and decide what we're going to do with those buildings and then incorporate that into the outdoor recreation plan. The other part of it is we're working on a master plan for the former Wiltsey property, and that the group that had worked on the recommendations for that property had spent over a year looking at what to do with that property. And one of their recommendations was that the administrative offices move to that property and that there be a community room adjacent to that, basically so that the public had a place to meet and to use it. Because right now we're not seeing a lot of use of the village hall. So this would give them a safe, accessible place that they could actually go to. So we began the discussions so that we could incorporate those decisions into those plans and we could continue on with our project. So looking at the village hall, we know that there's a lot of problems with it. We know there's accessibility issues. We know there's mold issues. We know there's construction issues. We know you're looking at millions of dollars to actually restore that building to the place that it needs to be. I did reach out to USDA and talked about CDBG grants as well to see if we would be eligible to do any work out there to improve that facility, because it would be quite a bit of money to restore that facility. And although there might be money for the accessibility part, there is no grant money available to actually restore that building to make it a more functional building. So anything we do to that building would be the burden of the taxpayers, basically. But as part of our planning process, what we did is we looked at what has happened or what has been discussed so far. So going back to 2008, we had a waterfront development plan. And at that time, the future of the village hall was discussed. And, you know, these were well thought out plans. They had citizen groups, they had public hearings, they had lengthy planning processes, but that plan basically shows that the village hall would be gone. And it talks about a potential relocation of the village hall community center. It doesn't say where that potential relocation would be. And it does talk about major elements of the plan include exploring the potential relocation of the village hall. That never happened. They never did. There was some work done as to
Administrator talking.
There was some work done as to, you know, what would it cost to open up the back, put the deck on, things of that nature. But there really wasn't, the conversation really didn't go anywhere as far as where it was going to be relocated at that time. But the plan did call for it being removed and then potentially relocated.
The village hall.
In 2013, which was about 5 years later, we had another plan. It was the downtown redevelopment plan and implementation strategy. And it didn't talk about the buildings in particular. It just talked about, you know, we need to look at encourage the highest and best use of our properties, develop an active functioning downtown, and position ourselves for a rapidly changing economy. That plan did, the part that did of that plan that did talk about the village hall was that they should now consider rehabilitation of the old village hall for use as a visitor center. So again, you're kind of waffling back and forth what to do with it. In 2014, we had the outdoor recreation plan, and the vision changed just in a year. So in 2013, you know, they were talking about should they remodel the village hall for a visitor center. A year later, they're saying
What
no.
did you say, Terry?
Terry,
coming in on their
whoever's identifying themselves as Terry and
What did you
possibly
say?
showing up as baseball, would you please mute your commentary? Okay. Go ahead.
and Deborah Wolf's iPhone.
Yeah.
So like I said, in 2013, the recommendation was to consider rehabilitating the old Village Hall for use as a visitor center. A year later, we changed our mind and we said, no, should be the Village Hall that should be repurposed as a visitor center. It did
Deborah
talk,
Wolf, will you please mute yourself? Thank you.
so like you said, it was looking at the visitor center to be the post office to be the visitor center. And then that plan also suggested or recommended that the Village Hall be redesigned to include a deck and serve as a reception venue. What a lot of people don't know is we actually did have an architect go out there, look at it, draft some preliminary plans. And he basically told us the cost was prohibitive. So the project just dropped at that point. And then this year, of course, as part of our planning process, having to look at all our plans and what we're going to do with our buildings, the plan commission met and they decided to recommend to the plan commission that the Village Hall be removed. From this point, the plan commission makes a recommendation to the village board, and then the village board has the ultimate decision on what happens with the building. I will say through all of this, there's been a lot of discussion about it being a historic structure. For the last 15 years, we've been talking about this. We've had some public opposition, but there's been no effort. There's been no designation to actually make it onto the state register of historic buildings or sites. So at this point, it's not technically considered a historic building. I know it has emotional value. I know local people view it as a historic structure, but if you're looking at in technical terms, it still is not a historic structure. And if it were on that list and we wanted to do anything, any renovations we make would have to comply with historic ordinances that regulate restoration of historic structures. There's a lot of building code issues out there we have to deal with. It was mentioned it's not ADA compliant. The elevator does not work. There's 4 furnaces, if I remember right in there. Some of them are burning fuel oil. So it's also, it's not a good example of green energy or fiscal responsibility when it comes to energy actually in that building. It's in rough shape. It's going to take a lot of money to restore that building. From the fiscal review side of it, even after COVID, it's just not bringing in the money, but the costs keep going up. The costs aren't substantial, but they do far outweigh what's coming in. So you probably saw in the staff report, estimated revenue for 2023 based on reservations is $1,890. In 2022, which was after COVID, it brought in $550. In 2021, it was $160. That one was probably related to COVID. In 2020, the revenue was $50, again, probably COVID related. And then when you look at the expenses, and we're not factoring in the labor, but just to keep the doors open right now, not including labor for this year, it was $8,774. That was as of August 5th. And last year it was $13,477, again, not including labor. Year before, which was COVID, which we really didn't have a lot of people using it, it was $9,133, again, no labor. Large part of that, of course, is the fuel oil to actually keep the building warm, which we have to do to try and minimize the mold that's growing in the basement. I know that people have talked about the cost of using the building, but certainly if people want to walk through that building, there's no expense to do that. And we're certainly always willing to entertain that, just so people can actually see the condition that the building is in. As far as the parks facilities building, kind of the same thing, went through the same planning processes. In 2006, there was a sports complex plan that talked about expanding the garage at the sports complex for purposes of the parks storage facility, because there's a lot of lawnmowers and things that are stored in the maintenance building. The waterfront development plan indicated that the village administrative offices would be moved to the location of the facilities maintenance building. That didn't happen, of course. And then in 2013, the downtown redevelopment plan showed that the building would be removed and the land used for parking. And then a year later, the 2014 outdoor recreation plan showed that the proposed that the garage at the sports complex be expanded, but it didn't indicate what the expansion would be for. It was presumed to be for parks purposes. And then we had the Wiltsey discussion again this past year, which also talked about it and said we need to move it from its current location. And preliminary discussion was it would be moved adjacent to a new administrative building. But the details of that Wiltsey property and how it's going to be developed have not been finalized yet. So those that's the history basically, or the summary of where we're at on the building as far as the planning that's been involved in it, the challenges, the discussion. We did get a bid on what it would cost to actually tear the building down. You know, in a perfect world, I think it'd be moved to a different, if the village decides to get rid of it, if it is salvageable for educational purposes, maybe it could be moved to a different site. I'm not sure. Those are all discussions that have to happen. But that is where we sit as far as our records on the village hall and the efforts that have gone into all the discussions historically about, do we preserve it? Do we move it? Do we vacate it? What do we do with it? And now here we sit in 2022, kind of discussing what we've been discussing for 15 years. So that's what I have, Rob. I really don't have any other information on it at this time.
Denise?
Julie, you didn't address the zoning issues.
Oh, the zoning issues. Yeah. So that building, we don't allow, that building is technically an assembly hall. And an assembly hall is not allowed down there. So we also have the issue that it's a non-conforming use, and we're restricted in what we can do with it as a non-conforming use, which adds another layer of what do we do with the building. You know, it's non-conforming because assembly halls aren't allowed there. It's non-conforming because it doesn't have parking. And then of course there's that whole health and safety side of it as well. So that is a major concern what you do with it. Has it lost its status as a non-conforming use? As long as it's used once a year, we can say it's grandfathered, but by law, we are restricted what we can do to a non-conforming use, how much we can improve it, how much money we can invest into it. And the village, contrary to what people think, the village is not exempt from their codes. It's not like we get a free pass just because of the village owns the building. The village still has to comply with the same laws as everybody else. So that does cause another challenge when we're looking at what we actually can do with the building.
I'd like to add one other point to Julie's summary of past and or current plans that incorporate the village hall and the general area down there. For those of you with us who may remember, back when the village carried forth its plan for the waterfront park and the waterfront revitalization, when the village began purchasing properties and creating the waterfront park, the original plans for that included essentially the lane of traffic that would be closest to Village Hall being designated as bike lane traffic throughout the downtown. That, for various reasons, was not carried forth and enacted. Since that time, as the prevalence and advancement of biking, families biking, people very keenly interested in biking as other means of transportation, etc. That is all part of the big picture being reconsidered, that has been reconsidered and will be part of this moving forward. Is if indeed the majority of decision makers after analysis believe it's in the best interest of the village to move forward in a direction similar to what was planned and even up to and including being written about in the papers at the time as a significant idea to bring bike lane traffic downtown. That is, that would be very difficult to pull off with a remodeled village hall in the same position, which would drive additional use than it's having now with the corresponding parking dilemma additions that it would provide. That in general is part of what we have challenged the new Outdoor Recreation and Transportation Committee of the village with assessing and presenting ideas on. The other thing that I would just personally like to mention, for those of you who can recall back when these discussions in earnest about the Village Hall building in particular, also the Parks and Maintenance building, which we discussed today, began about 1.5 years ago. My own opinion that remains the same is if we were to consider moving forward with a relocation of the Village Hall, that we really need to assess thinking generationally. I respect and admire and take to heart, in particular, the comments from the public today, recounting generationally from their youth and from earlier times what that building meant to you and what it means to you. What I believe we as public servants are challenged with is giving fair voice and fair consideration to generationally moving forward, and how will future generations be best positioned to have those same memories and to develop the same sense of community, etc. And in particular, in terms of the former Wiltsey property, the 56 acres that we purchased adjacent to the sports complex, in terms of thinking generationally there, to have a modernized Village Hall building that was as close to equivalent to theatrical and musical use for our youth, for our community, as close to what we have in the county at the auditorium in Fish Creek, to have an avenue for youth in the community, any adults in the community who want a modern venue to practice, gather, whether it's music, whether it's theater, whether it's a Christmas concert that the students participating in would like to do again, whether we would like to be able to put performances on where we would have the right type of building with the right type of accessibility, with the right type of parking, to where we could shuttle over all of our community residents from Scandia to be able to take part in and witness Christmas shows, productions, etc. That's, in my opinion, what we also owe the community in considering this as a scale is there a manner in which a Village Hall community center can be put forth in modern terms in the village to best serve the future? That's part of this as well. But certainly everything that everyone has said today is taken to heart. I appreciate each and every one of you who's joined in, and those of you who have made comments. I would like to give everyone from the public one last chance if there's anything else you'd like to express or convey this morning. And then we'll let my fellow committee members have their final thoughts. So we have Dave Watkins and then Dick Burris after that, and then anyone else who would like to add anything. Dave, if you'd unmute yourself and please go ahead.
Yes. I'm late to this game. I mean, my family and I just moved here 2 years ago, but this issue really speaks to me. And I just, again, want to say it would just be really, really a sad thing to lose that building right in the heart of the village. I understand the usage issues and stuff. I'm not opposed to a bigger complex of some sort out there in Liberty Grove, you know, I'm really not. But the village hall is just such a precious jewel. It would be so sad to lose that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Dick?
Yeah, I'd just like to respond a little bit to some of what Julie said. I was a member of the committee that looked for over the course of a year at the Wilsey property, and we did discuss a community building attached to what would probably be the post office and village offices, et cetera, et cetera. But to my recollection, we never talked about building it to replace the village hall. I don't think there was one mention of taking the village hall down in the year's worth of meetings that we had. Fish Creek is a good example of a move to a modern facility to hold meetings, et cetera, and to maintain a village hall, which has some real presence and historical value. Secondly, I've been a member of multiple committees in my tenure here. I was on the board in the 80s when we looked at the first master street plan. Parts of it were adopted, most of it was not. I was a member of the committee in 11 where we looked at downtown redevelopment when we considered ourselves a blight area, and we never talked about taking the village hall down. Through the course of my home here in Sister Bay, we've been told repeatedly that rules change. There was a time when you couldn't take a tree down on the bluff because the village had serious ordinances against it. There were fines levied. The library and the village administration building probably is not up in the on the old school site because of the regulations we thought we had. And all of a sudden trees are gone on the bluff, and the sites are opened up, and fill is added to allow more buildings. And what we hear is, well, rules changed in Madison by the Walker administration, therefore we can't really do much about this. And it seems to me we're holding ourselves as a village to a standard that we're no longer holding developers to. I just think that the analysis that has gone on, and Julia, I appreciate your frustration. You come in late to this, and Denise has been here for a lot of these. We have gone round and round about these buildings. But in my mind, the village hall has always held a sacred spot almost, if you will. The village hall is going to be there. There's been some mention of, well, what are we going to do when the post office leaves? If there was ever any discussion about taking it down, it was about maybe that will become the visitor center or something like that. But this is really the first time in my recollection that I've heard of talk about taking these buildings down. And I just think Jane and I, my wife and I travel a fair piece, and we go into buildings all over this nation and abroad. And there are parts of the towns and villages and municipalities that are held almost sacred. And to me, that village hall is one of those. We spend a lot of money in this village. We've been told that development will bring our rates down, and we're still 5 mils ahead of anybody else up here as far as a mill rate. So I'm not sure where that development brings us. But I think if we want to talk about something that's important to the residents and to the visitors of this community, it's that village hall. Thank you very much.
Yeah, amen.
Thank you, Dick. Denise and then Sharon.
Rob, I know that you said that we're not making any recommendations, village board, because we have another public input coming up next week. But I would like to put this forward to see how the rest of the committee members feel. That after listening to testimony, I think that it is important that not only parks, but moving forward, the village board would have all the information required to make the best decision moving forward, whatever that may be. And so I would like to make for our next village board meeting a recommendation from Parks that the village board contact someone to get a quote on what would need to be done to the village hall to make it accessible. And that means filling in the basement, removing the elevator, removing the outside stairs, and dropping the interior floor so that you may enter the village hall at ground level and would not require any ramp or elevator, so it would be ADA accessible. And I presume on top of that, you know, there would be HVAC and other things, but I think we should know what that number is. And if we can get that, we can make a better determination. If we, and whoever said it earlier, yes, this village has spent a lot of money on the waterfront. The village board had overwhelming support for spending that money, the same as spending the money on Pebble Beach to keep that in a pristine form. So if it becomes a priority, we can find the money, or the taxpayers of Sister Bay can say, yes, this is important enough that I will bite the bullet and have my taxes go up, just like what they did for the waterfront. As one of the arguments that I used for spending all the money on the waterfront, it was, if you take that money and you divide it by forever, it's minuscule. I think that still would apply to this village hall scenario also. But I think it would be extremely helpful that we have all the information that we need to make the best decision, and that the taxpayers of Sister Bay know that we have done our due diligence. So I would like to make that recommendation for the next village board meeting from Parks.
Yeah, and for clarifying sake, I did not say we could not or would not make any recommendations. I said we would not be making any decisions on the buildings today.
Oh, okay.
And in essentially, you're adding more points, relative points to the discussion on remodeling the village, the feasibility of remodeling the village hall, as I mentioned. So what you mentioned, along with what I mentioned, is all part of what will be the same agenda item, which is a discussion on the village board regarding, you know, a cost analysis on the remodeling of the village hall, which we will have on the agenda for the September 20th meeting.
Okay.
Sharon?
Yes, just a quick comment on one of Denise's about who you would get to make this analysis is important, whether a second two opinions or whatever are needed, because I think some of her suggestions would not have to be done. There's nothing wrong with ramp accessibility. You don't necessarily have to drop a floor and make it ground level, but that's just as to who you choose, what kind of things you ask for are important, because you can ask for the minimum to be done to make it usable and accessible and safe. And you can ask for a mammoth plan. But my main comment, after listening to everybody, and especially your conclusion, Rob, is that both ideas of two factions are doable. And that is modern building for administration, for a big meeting room, for a gathering place, whatever. That is very doable, as well as the preservation of the basic structure and basic uses of the historic village hall. I don't think that they are mutually exclusive. I believe that forwarding, certainly modernization of buildings and forward thinking of the village is absolutely valid. I also believe that preservation of certain buildings is absolutely valid. And so I would recommend that the board keep an open mind to both ideas without, mammoth amount of money being spent that make them both the same usage. I would not say that they should both be the same usage. I would say that they would have different valid reasons for existing. Amen.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, thank you, everybody, for your commentary and your input today. Based on our agenda, I would like to add that agenda item 6A is a clarifier that our second and final public input session on the Parks and Maintenance Building and the Village Hall Building will be conducted in person at the fire station on September 6th at 6 p.m. For any of you who have joined us this morning, if you have any other thoughts or you have refined thoughts and would like to come and express your sentiments again, please feel free to do so. If you know anyone else in the community who was not able to make it today, please feel free to let them know as well, as we'll be publicly announcing the meeting as we always do. But you certainly let anyone know it will be in person at the fire station on September 6th at 6 p.m. I would also like to clarify as agenda item 6B that the next regular Parks Committee meeting will be a virtual meeting via Zoom on Monday, September 12th at 2:30 p.m. That will be our standard monthly Parks meeting. Denise?
I just wanted to ask for 2 agenda items for the 12th to be added to that Parks agenda meeting. One has to do with the curb cuts that are along the downtown on the highway, that some are still painted yellow and there have been and some are not. There are not curb stops or curb cuts there at all, where we are losing additional parking spaces and they are not striped. So I'd like to have that bigger discussion. And I would also like to talk about the request from the Parks Director about closing the bathrooms in Waterfront Park for Fall Fest. I think that's very important and I'd like to know why, and I think that would be detrimental to the festival. I know that there are many, many, many porta potties throughout town that
Got to
day.
keep the bathrooms open.
You got to keep bathrooms. That.
People don't like using the porta potty.
Okay, Patrice, I'd ask you to mute, please. Okay, go ahead, Denise.
Those were the only 2 things I would like
Okay,
to add.
that's fine. Julie will make a note of those. Thank you. Okay, once again, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. And at 9:27 a.m., I will motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone.